Welcome back, everyone, to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization Show, the home of Googleization Nation, where we talk with HR and business thought leaders about the crazy, never normal shift going on all around us. Our goal is to bring you ways to reimagine tomorrow and explore the ever-changing convergence of people, business, and technology. Here is your host, Ira Wolfe.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization, and another edition of our new monthly series at the corner of Main Street and Wall Street, where we talk each month about the intersection of the economy, politics, and technology. We realize you have many listening and watching options and are grateful you've taken the time to join us. Joining us today will be a very special guest, Dr. Chris Borick. He's the director of Muhlenberg's Institute of Public Opinion, and one of the top pollsters in the country. It's just hours away from our vice presidential event debate last night, and we're only 30 days out until the election. So we can't wait to hear what Chris has to say. And on behalf of all of us, we're grateful that he's willing to actually carve out time, because between his oversight and leadership at the Institute, conducting many media interviews, as you can imagine, about the upcoming debate and the election, and teaching political science at the college, Chris is quite the busy man. And of course, I'm pleased to welcome back my two co-hosts, Mat Van Alstyne and John Aidan Byrne, who I will bring onto the screen in just a minute. But before we dive in, let me just take a breath here and just for a moment. I've been talking about something called VUCA for 2 decades. That's VUCA. Some of you might be familiar with it. For those who aren't, it's an acronym representing volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. It's a term that was introduced about 40 years ago in the U.S. military to describe our future world for planning. It was pretty abstract until just about 4 years ago when COVID hit, the pandemic hit all of us, and overnight it seemed everyone was able to see VUCA as our new reality. VUCA has now been adopted by business leadership for good reason to describe the environment in which we live. It's the foundation of course, I teach in innovation and entrepreneurship and organizational change. And frankly, it's affecting all of us. Well, it's only the second day of October. And in addition to ongoing volatile uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity about U.S. politics, we're now faced with a longshoreman strike, the catastrophic impact of Hurricane Helene. And that's just on the domestic front. We've got the unknown outcomes of the ongoing Gaza war, the instability in the Middle East, increased by the hostility between Iran and Israel. And it's only Wednesday. And it seems that VUCA occurs on almost every day that ends in Y these days. But we're here to talk about today, why does any of that matter? And we know it matters as far as our world and our lives, but is it affecting the election? Are these events going to sway any voters? Did the debate last night change anybody's mind? Or are all the results already baked in? So we're about to find out very shortly. On today's show, I've got my regular co-host, Mat Van Alstyne. Matt, if you recall, is the co-founder and managing partner of Odeon Capital Group. It's a leading full-service boutique broker, dealer to institutional clients. And many of you know Matt from his commentary and outlook on the highly rated Odeon Capital Conversations podcast. And then we've got John Aidan Byrne, who's a veteran Wall Street business journalist, editor, filmmaker, and successful podcast host of the Odeon Capital Conversations and Dig Life Deep. He's got 2 major projects going on. One is a movie project about the legendary life of a Wall Street CEO and scholar, and the other on Norman Rockwell. And then we'll be introducing, as soon as he's available, Dr. Chris Borick, who is a professor of political science and director of the Muhlenberg College Institute of Public Opinion. Chris is nationally recognized because he's for the over 300 large-scale public opinion surveys he's conducted, and the institute he founded over 20 years ago at Muhlenberg, which currently has an A+ rating, according to Nate Silver's 538 polling. So let me welcome John and Matt to the stage, and hopefully Chris will be joining us very shortly. So welcome, guys.
Hey, welcome, Ira.
What's Monday, or what's new since we were all together just like 3-4 weeks ago? It's like
well, a lot of fuka around. I think that's going to be used in our lexicon in the next couple of weeks. It's just a very bizarre and unusual time. There's a kind of a fear and a loathing in America, and I'm not uplifted after last night's debate. It was okay. I don't think it shifted the dial in either direction. I think fear. That's the big thing. There's a lot of chaos in America, and I think Americans want some sense of direction. And we can look at the battleground states and where this is all shaping up with Chris shortly. But just going to be fascinating.
Matt, I mean, Wall Street. I mean, we got all this stuff going on. I mean, I don't know if the debates was going to change anything going on in your markets or, with your investors or your outlook. But, now we have these increased tensions in the Middle East. We've talked about that often, but this seems to be a new upswell. We still have Gaza to deal with. And then we have the domestic, on the domestic front, we're dealing with Helene. We were talking just before about the devastation on the coast of Florida, in Asheville. And, and again, already gas prices are ticking up, probably for whether that's because of longshoremen or whether that's because of Iran and Israel, who knows? But there seems to be a lot of volatility. So what's going on in what are you hearing?
Well, it's interesting because the train that's driving Wall Street, it's a one-way track, man. I mean, come on. We've got a federal government that spends 39 cents more than every dollar it collects every single day. And how do they do that? By printing money and sending that cash out to the wealthiest of America. And you saw it extremely extravagantly during COVID, where they hand out checks of $700 to poor people and checks of $7, $8, $15 million to rich people, to save jobs. And it was lipstick on a pig, because we have a pig economy, and the federal government, the way it's working, because this train ain't stopping. I'm sorry. When you're spending 20 cents of every dollar collected on interest, and that number is not going down, it's going up. When you have Social Security, it's going to run out of cash in 2031. When you have Medicare, it's going to run out of money in 2028. The Wall Street train is going one direction. It's going one direction only. It's going up, because the wealthiest in America are going to continue to get rich. And all of this nuisance, or nuance of who are you going to vote for, I think America has been exposed. I mean, America now sees there is a political class, a neocon class, a pro-war class, and there's a pro-citizen class. That pro-citizen class wants to restore America's greatness. They want to restore American jobs. The pro-war class, it doesn't matter who the candidate is. And what you're seeing with Kamala Harris is a relief rally, because it's not Joe Biden, because that guy can't put a word together in a sentence. The relief rally is no longer Joe Biden, but the neocon class has their candidate. It doesn't matter if it's George W. Bush. It doesn't matter if it's Barack Obama. It doesn't matter if it's Hillary Clinton. It doesn't matter if it's Joe Biden. It doesn't matter if it's Kamala Harris. It doesn't matter if it's Tim Walz. You have a neocon class that has to perpetuate the continuation of war, and they have a candidate, and that candidate right now, according to the polls, is going 50-50, and I hope the polls are wrong, because we have to save America and elect someone who restores democracy, restores integrity, restores American hope, restores American jobs, restores American manufacturing, restores American priorities on not these foreign wars of folly in Ukraine, but restores American hope and dreams. We need someone who can do that. I don't care if it's Donald Trump. I don't care if it's J.D. Vance, but it has to be someone who's pro-American, because what we've got right now is a disaster, and I think America sees it, and I have hope in America, and that's why the stock market is up.
An amazing declarations there, Matt. And, both candidates say they're going to fix and repair America, but how they're going to do that is going to be worth questioning, because we've come out of a $2 trillion deficit last year, headed to another 2 trillion again this year. So it can't be all debt fueled. So that's why I'm curious what Chris is going to say about some of these battleground states. Are the tides shifting? If you look at them, and I could just quickly go through because
hey, John, just hold your thought there because it's a perfect segue into Chris, who is here and ready to join us. So I'm going to bring Chris to our stage. Welcome, hey, Chris. Dr. Chris Borick from the Muhlenberg College Institute of Public Opinion. Welcome, and my down the hall buddy. So no sound there, Chris.
Do you want me to talk over this while Chris is
trying to go ahead. Yeah, keep talking.
I was just going to say, as some interesting context, for many people already know this, but it's worth repeating that there are 7 swing states. There were, at least up to recently, and of course a lot of the polling has shown there's a tightening in the races. Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, and these hold the key to the White House. And of course, both campaigns, Harris and Trump, are targeting the undecided voters in these states. What's truly interesting is how tight some of these contests were in 2020. The 2020 winner in Arizona was Biden by 10,000 votes, and that has 11 of the 538 electoral votes. Georgia, the winner was Biden by 13,000 votes. And that is 16 of the 530 electoral votes. Michigan, Biden clinched it with 150,000 votes in 2020. That's 15 of the electoral votes. Nevada, Biden won by 34,000 votes, 6 of the 538 electoral votes. North Carolina, Trump won by 74,000 votes in 2020. Pennsylvania, which is your state, Chris, and this is apparently very tightening, but you had them neck and neck, I think, as recently as 2 or 3 days ago, Harris and Trump, and others have Trump slightly ahead. Biden won that by 82,000 votes. So those 82,000 votes, if we're talking apples to apples, have shifted, obviously. There's a very interesting, dire fact about Pennsylvania. The price of groceries have risen faster in Pennsylvania than in any other part of America. And Erie County is apparently a bellwether for how the rest of PA is going to do. 1 in 8 voters, 1 in 8 people there are classified as food insecure. That's the Department of Agriculture's, the government's definition of the poverty, food insecure, not of poverty, but of not having enough to eat on a daily basis. So lots to watch, and looking forward to hearing Chris's analysis here.
No, so yeah, we would like to silence a lot of the noise that's going on in the background, but hopefully this is a good noise. So Chris, you were in the background. I think you heard the end of what Matt was saying. Certainly, John, a ton going on just within the last 14 hours. We had the debate ended. And I guess the one big question is, before we, as we dive into all this, is do you expect the needle to move at all? I mean, so let me put up the poll that you showed from, I think this was September. This is the latest one, Chris, from last week. Is that right? Yeah. And this was Pennsylvania, and neck and neck, 48-48. I guess the big change is a little bit more momentum from Harris, but than it was with Biden. But are any of these events going to move the needle?
It's a great question, Ira. I hope you hear me, first of all.
Yes, now we can.
Sorry about that challenge. This is a complicated. Well, lots of things are complicated, but as John was working through those polling numbers and the past performance in 2020, the one overarching takeaway is how close it was and how close It is. And therefore, if you told me in one cycle, a vice presidential debate, what kind of impact is it going to have on electoral choices? I would tell you almost none, because vice presidents have almost no impact as candidates. Marginally, we could do all the kind of pull out a couple points maybe here and there. But you put the confluence of those two things together, really tight races in a lot of states, and events like a debate, and you start to say, well, a little movement here could be incredibly impactful. And so while I don't think a vice presidential debate is going to move the needle all that much, it doesn't take much movement to have major impacts in Pennsylvania and beyond.
Okay, so let's add the other events of yesterday, just in one day. The debates at night, at the start, at the crack of the day at 12:01, we've got a longshoreman strike, which obviously short term is not going to affect much, but it could lead to some major disruptions in the economy, which then trickles down. And we have Iran and Israel attacking one another. Where does that play?
Yeah, it's a lot.
That's an easy question.
Yeah, it's a very easy question. Look, these are what we might describe as atmospherics in an election season. They're important events in their own right. A major strike. We can add the hurricane in the effects in key states like Georgia, North Carolina. Obviously, the events in the Middle East, including yesterday's attack, are part of the broader environment. So where do they weigh in? Are any of those issues for most voters incredibly salient? Not on the surface, but over time and as part of a broader mood, national mood, which we do equate with voting in election cycles, they could be important. And again, if for example, the Biden administration is seen, even though Biden himself is not on the ballot, his vice president is seen as not effectively dealing with these, or in some ways, his policies have led to any of these outcomes, it could be woven into the appraisals that you're getting from some voters. Most voters are locked in; they're not moving. Of course, in these very tight states with modest margins, those things can't be impactful. So if I'm, Vice President Harris, and I see these events going down, I'm certainly concerned that they're in the atmosphere as people are making their appraisals across the country.
Do you see the pro-Harris vote as a pro-Harris vote, or is it more of an relief it's not Biden, not Trump vote?
Oh, it's a great question, Matthew. It's a little of both. I'll be a weasel and political scientist here. There is some positive affect for Harris among voters. You see it, for example, young women, college age, educated folks that really feel an affinity for her. That wasn't there for Biden. Some of those voters, most of those voters would have ended up there for Biden, but maybe not all of them would have been engaged. So there is an effect there. Certainly, the kind of what we call negative partisanship among anti-Trump voters is real. It'll play a part and maybe bring some individuals in. For example, I'm fascinated by the Haley voters, if we will, people in suburban Philadelphia that are registered Republicans still to this day, even though there's been a big movement there, that voted in the primary. Places like Montgomery County, very wealthy, high educated county just outside of Philadelphia. Haley got about 25% of the vote. Now, most of those people are probably going to return based on their party cues to Trump in the election, but a significant share might say, you know what, I'm not a big fan of Harris. I'm not necessarily, voting for her, but I just can't vote for Trump again as a Republican. And that's, again, Pennsylvania. If you know Pennsylvania, that's not trivial. That is not a trivial amount. And even though Republicans have narrowed the registration gap in the state, you can't have a lot of defections as a Republican and win statewide here.
How do you see I feel like in my lifetime, I don't remember, and maybe it's just because I'm not paying attention. You see someone like RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, like prominent Democrats who ran for president as Democrats as recently as this year and then last cycle. And then on the other side, you have Mitt Romney and Jeff Flake and what might have been considered in a historical context, conservative Republicans, like far right, like neocon normal, like, and they're both endorsing their rivals, and it's weird because I would say, from my perspective, you don't see not libertarians, liberals like RFK and Tulsi. I mean, RFK is he's gotten notorious for his vaccines, but his most prominent stuff was environmental, suing corporations for the laws that they were skirting. They weren't totally black and white, but they were just dumping chemicals into the Hudson River, and he cleaned up the Hudson River, like which you would think is just like a liberal Democrat rah-rah, and this guy's endorsing Trump. And then you have Mitt Romney and Jeff Flake, who are super anti-abortion and super just the antithesis of what, and they're rich and their money and their private equity. Like, what is going on?
Yeah, let's not ignore the Cheneys.
I was going to go there, Ira. It's a cool question, Matthew. And there is a reordering, right? There's when I listened to a little bit of your talk before I came on, kind of the shift in American politics, the ascension of populism within the Republican Party in particular. A lot of these things are impactful. But Ira, you mentioned Cheney. I remember in the day when Taylor Swift endorsed Harris. It was about the same time that Cheney endorsed Harris in this case. My students, I was trying to make a case for them. A lot of them are young. They don't remember anything about Dick Cheney. I go, do you remember Dick Cheney? There's one older person in my class. I go, he was the Dark Lord, right? Back to your point, Matt. I mean, there was nobody more villainized on the left than Dick Cheney. To have Dick Cheney, and this is not all that long, 16 years later, endorsing a Democratic candidate.
And RFK.
Yeah.
The most iconic of names. RFK is a little more complicated given his kind of weave, but as you said, it comes from the iconic Democratic family. His history of environmental engagement as a lawyer on the Hudson really made him an idol, right? I know a lot of environmental friends for a long time looked up to him as this person. To have him endorse Trump, this is emblematic of a very complex, reordered American political scene.
Do you see the same thing when you look across Europe and you see like Starmer? He hung on to power, but it was through manipulation of their version of electoral college. And you see Macron hang on to power through manipulation of their version of electoral college, where disproportionate voting allows you to manipulate the outcome. And then you look at like Meloni in Italy and I can't remember the guy's name in Holland, but it seems like there's a definite shift towards populism, and the establishment is fighting back, so much so that you have the unprecedented situation where the Democratic nominee for president has never received a vote ever in her entire life for president. And she's somehow neck and neck with someone who was president. I mean, it just seems like something that's crazy happening. At least it feels that way.
Yeah, no, this is a very turbulent historic period. Your claims, Matt, about kind of broadly defined rise of populism is supported very well. This is the reality, right? You see it throughout Europe. You see it throughout other parts of the world where there's been ascension of populism, and also. We kind of weave that together with the rise of authoritarianism. As political scientists, as we look across the world and we look at kind of democracies, as you said, hanging on some places more of the established democracies and rules. It's a stress period. It's a stress test period, and we see some places where we've seen more of the traditional democratic structures hold on, others where they've shifted pretty dramatically. So, and the U.S. election is being looked at as around the world as a big case study in this broader dynamic that's playing out. So that's very fair, I think, to appraise.
I get the sense that people. I'm sorry. One last, John.
Yeah.
I feel like people have pre-decided, at least it seems to me, why Kamala lost if she ends up losing. And there's two schools of thought. One is they should have stuck with Biden, or she should have chosen Shapiro. Do you have any sense on if the race would be 5 points wider if Shapiro were sitting in Pennsylvania versus Mr. Waltz?
It's a good question. They're both good questions. Why if she did lose, or would Biden have been better? I don't think Biden would have necessarily been better at this point of his career on the trail this fall. That's my it's one of those things we can't prove, but that's my assumption. The Shapiro question is absolutely fascinating. He is, we just polled him in the Ira put up our latest poll. In that poll, he had a high 50s approval rating. He was down a little bit from
in Pennsylvania.
Oh yes, I'm sorry, very, very important point. Only in Pennsylvania. But in this day and age, in a very purplish state, where high polarized divides exist, and we're playing out a really polarized election, to have a Democratic governor have those kind of numbers, basically a 2-1 when you take it positive to negative, is extraordinary. He is a talented, gifted political figure, and I think he's going to have a lot to say in American politics moving forward. And I think it's one of those decisions. Would it have helped in Pennsylvania? I know it wouldn't have hurt in Pennsylvania. Would it have hurt in other purple states where his pro-Israel stance was? I mean, it seems like that was the logic she was choosing. It's fair to say that was part of kind of keeping a Democratic coalition together, and which is always difficult, right? As you said, like people said he chose Michigan over Pennsylvania by picking up. It could, that's good. It's kind of think of that. The last thing I'll say about that is I was giving a talk earlier this morning. I still don't, and I met Josh Shapiro a couple times. I don't know Josh Shapiro. I don't think Josh Shapiro really wanted that job. I think that probably came across. I think he's been very measured in his whole career of where he's picked control to run, from local office to state house to attorney general to governor. Could you intuit that he might have thought that it's better to not be on a losing ticket, and then he has a clean shot in 2028? It's a risk either way, right? So you're vice president for 4 or 8 years. There's no certainty there coming out. If you lose, you're attached first time in your life to a losing ticket. Again, this is all as he met with Vice President Harris. I wonder if there was some tensions there. This is speculation on my part, pure speculation. Well, there was leaks that he demanded too much power, and she didn't, and she wanted a subordinate. Maybe that was part of it too. He was, I'll only do this if I have control of certain things. So I don't know.
I want to pick up on a few things. What Matt was saying, just the chaos in Europe, in the US, across the globe, and what you said, Chris, the polarization, the rise of autocracies. I believe we'll be having another conversation in the coming weeks, Ira, with Victor Schiffs, who has written about this topic in his latest book. But I mean, there are probably parallels in history about this. There's a fear, I think, among the electorate of they're losing control and they're not sure what's going on. And we hear this word, the elites, being bandied around, the elites in Washington, who are kind of introducing all kinds of stuff without, referring to local electorate. The whole principle of subsidiarity, state rights, seems to not play any role. You've got this identity politics, which is a perfect example. That's not coming from the local level identity politics. It's coming from Washington, from think tanks and ivory towers. Local people and local electorate only care about primarily, this is not exclusively, bread and butter issues. And that's what will decide some of I'm sure that's what you're seeing on the ground. So I'd just kind of like you to address that. My other follow-up was, to use Sean Hannity's phrase, when Harris entered the race there was a sugar high. So she started to ride the coattails of that sort of rising popularity with, at the convention and so on. That seems to be, that seems to be diminishing that impact. And so I'm wondering, are you seeing anything on that? If there's any criticism of Harris from both sides, that she's not a very transparent candidate, and the longer the more days left between now and election day, she stands to lose more ground as people see through, what she's talking about. She's been accused of not being very specific and being a horrible flip-flopper. What she's saying now, she didn't say the last 3 years or 4 years ago. And then the Kennedy impact, has that shifted the dial a little bit too?
Yeah, they're good questions, John. I'll start with the first kind of the tensions between elites and masses, if we will, as a term. It's real, right? You see this playing out in so many dimensions of American politics and American life. Our last poll, I keep reciting numbers from our poll, for good or bad. The biggest divide I saw in terms of the electorate right now, you go gender divide's very big. There's other divides, regional age groups, but the biggest single one was educational attainment. That in the last 10 years as a factor in how we view life, how we view politics, how we view democratic systems is the driver. And this is the tensions we talk about in populism in democracies. It's enormous in Pennsylvania. Those with a 4-year degree versus those that don't. The difference is 25 points, and it is enormous. There was one time when I didn't even have to wait for educational attainment in polls because it didn't really matter. It was kind of a whole bunch of other socio-political factors. Now it is, and that really is declining. You heard that last night in the debate. I mean, the talk about elites and experts and how we view the world is really now more so than ever. And that's not this is a U.S. specific. I think that it's elevated in the U.S. This part of this broader discussion that we've been having there. To your second point, your second question is about the sugar high or whatever that came with Harris. Yeah, sure. I think that's legitimate. Part of this, she was a change. There was a lot within the Democratic coalition during Biden's after Biden's disastrous performance in the debate in June and early July. There was Democrats were downtrodden. They were really low. And so anytime when people have kind of historical lows, enthusiasm and you do something different, it's most likely going to regress, upward. And in her case, it did. She rebuilt parts of the Democratic coalition that were really waning. Younger voters, voters of color, women. As I said, there's an advantage Democrat, but even in that group, especially younger women, it gave them enthusiasm, and it transformed the race in a lot of ways, made it as competitive as we saw right now. And in late June, it was looking like it was drifting away from the Democrats. Can we, as you mentioned, John, do you think that's possible? That's something, moving forward, that she has more room to kind of drop because Trump is such a known entity? I think that's fair. I think there's more uncertainty around her than there is around Trump, and that could lead to some diminishing. And she can't. Right now, the polls, again, we talk about this, it's about as even as possible. And that's going to really change. That's going to translate into a lot of factors like turnout, organizational structures, all those things that are going to come into play. They're happening in Pennsylvania. I'm watching them every day, and they're a big part of the story. But she can't sustain, a very large drop in her standing because it is that close. She has a couple point national lead and more or less dead even in the key swing states.
Chris, I just pulled this up, and I just shut it down because it was, or I just lost the page. But I know there's been some quick polls on kind of huge jumps in favorability. I mean, people were talking about who won the election. or who won the debate last night. And it's, depending on, I guess, who you listen to and what your viewpoints going into it were and what your biases are, what filter you saw the conversations through, affected that. But it seems universally there was the favorability polls were much more significant for Walz than for Vance. And although both of them increased, Vance is still in the hole, still in the red. And we're welcoming Matt back. But also,
hi, Matt.
The favorability polls went way up. Where does that have any effect? I mean, it seems there's almost a disconnect between favorability and who I'm going to vote for. It's like almost as a personality poll. It's like, yeah, it's interesting to know that they're an extrovert or introvert, but who cares? Yeah, Chris, I think we lose your.
Okay, let me, I guess, talk over him in the meantime. So I'm going to ask Chris also what's his overall take, for the who's going to win, obviously, and then we have separate House and Senate races, which can't be overlooked. I think there's the 435 seats in the U.S. House of Representatives are up for election. Currently, 213 Democrats and Republicans have a slim majority with 220. They say Arizona could flip to the Democrats in the first congressional district. Arizona's 6th congressional district as well. Maine's 2nd congressional district is at risk for Democrats. And then on the Senate side, which has 100 members, again, 51 Democrats, including 3 or 4 independents, 49 Republicans, and 34 seats up for election. So,
yeah, we can hear you again. Yep.
Good. Thank you, John, and thanks for your question, Ira. I'll drift back to Ira for a second. The favorability are fascinating to look at. How we have a personal feel about the candidates, and how that shifts or doesn't shift over time. And we do that in our polls. We haven't polled the vice president favorability because, again, I think it's a modest impact. I could use other questions on my surveys to do so. Last night, I do think the debate for Vance in particular, who's struggled with favorability since he came out, last night was valuable. He came across, at least my appraisal, as more of an attractive figure than often is, I think, perceptions of him. He handled, he wasn't as adversarial. It was kind of a softer, gentler perspective that he put out, which I think was a good strategy to have for him. So I think it was probably a pretty good night if you're looking at any impact on his favorability moving forward. Again, how impactful that is. John, as you mentioned, the ballot it's I gave a talk this morning, and in Pennsylvania, I'll give an example of how deep the election is. Where I live. I live in Nazareth, Pennsylvania, which is a borough in Northampton County in the Lehigh Valley. Northampton County is the consummate bellwether county in Pennsylvania. It's only in the last century deviated from the presidential outcome 3 times. And Pennsylvania went a couple of times. It is that good as a predictive place. And here's what I have. I'm the premier presidential state where there's incredible amounts of campaign activity, the most visited state, the most money being spent. It is just for the top, right, from the presidential campaign. As you mentioned, U.S. Senate race, the Senate is a 1 vote difference when it comes to Democrat and Bob Casey, who's running for a 4th term here. He's won his last 3 races by double digits. He's an iconic name in Pennsylvania politics. Our polls and others show he's going up against Dave McCormick, the Republican candidate. He's up by a handful of points. It's a competitive race. Enormous amounts of money are coming into that race. You move down to the House races. I live in the Lehigh Valley. It's the 7th congressional. You were citing districts, John. Check out the 7th congressional district here in the Lehigh Valley. It's one of the most competitive in the country. A Democratic incumbent, Susan Wild, just won by 2 points in 2022, probably aided by the Dobbs decision. I think that helped nudge her over. That's the type of seat that flips usually in these years for the president's party. That race is really contested. I get to vote in that. I'm in a house race, a state house race in Pennsylvania, the 137th district. Pennsylvania's got 203 legislative districts. You didn't have to do much about that state house district. 203 seats. Democrats have a 1-seat advantage in the state house. Republicans control the Senate by 3 votes. Well, what I make the case, I get to vote in every one of these districts that have meaningful impact this time around. That's a lot, right? That's a lot. Some of you people listening in states, they have 0 districts that they're going to be voting in that matter. You know who you're living in South Dakota. You're going to the polls and you know the outcome already. I don't. Those 4 races all the way down my state house are neck and neck, which is kind of a blessing, right? I get to choose in that. But it tells you kind of the overwhelming amount of pressure that's falling in certain places right now. From my perspective, my doors are knocked on almost every day. My stack of mailers that my wife laughed at me about that I've been saving that comes to my house is getting bigger and bigger. It's that kind of environment that's going on right now that's exceptional in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and just to add a piece of context, because I know we're not in the same districts, but we're neighbors in many cases. So I have the same opportunities as Chris does in some of these races. But Susan Wild's the predecessor to that was Charlie Dent. It was a Republican seat for 16 years, 20 years. So it was a Republican stronghold. And then when he dropped out, Susan Wiles has it. So now it's slightly a Democratic advantage. But it's again, good point. But just to put some context on that, where it is and how quickly things are changing.
Can I ask a question, Chris? From your seat, going back to whenever you started, going through whatever elections you went through, like 2016 was, at least in the perception of the zeitgeist, at least where I live, a notable miss by the pollsters. 2020, the pollsters got the outcome right, but I feel like it was even more of a miss, at least percentage-wise, because Biden won, but he won by 19,000 votes in Pennsylvania or wherever it was that neck and neck, but he was supposed to win that state by like 9%, or at least that's my memory. And then going into this polling year, what in your seat, what changes have you seen, like in terms of like cold calling houses and then cold calling cell phones or texting or online? Like, what are you guys doing to actually feel like you have, give me faith that you know what you're doing?
It's a great question, Matt. It is. Yeah. And first of all, as a polling, as a field, right? I could talk specifically about our poll and our methodologies. You're right that there was an underrepresentation of Trump vote in 2016. There was an underrepresentation in 2020 in both of those polling years. And our polls personally, we had the same impact. We overestimated or underestimated Trump's largely by a couple of points. And again, in most years, if I'm off by 3 points, that's a fairly good year. If you miss, here's one of the things about polling. If a win-loss means nothing in a poll, it's just another data point, an interval, but it means everything in terms of how we appraise it, right? So if I'm on Obama, say Obama's going to win by 5 points and he wins by 2, nobody cares. Oh, great job. I miss, in a presidential one by a couple points and it crosses the line. Well, you have the worst polling year ever. The legitimate critique of polls was systematically they underrepresented Trump in both those years. Here's the fascinating kind of other piece of information. In 2018, we polled in Pennsylvania. 2022, we polled in Pennsylvania. And our polls were incredibly accurate. One of the best years I've ever had, most recently. Using basically the same methodologies, we're tweaking them all the time. We could have that conversation if you ever want to, about different methods being employed. Gives me a big question. Well, is Trump back on the ballot? Is there a Trump effect that we can capture? Some turnout, some underrepresentation in polling. We try to make up for those things in weighting. I can't give you 100% confidence that there's something that personally confident going into the cycle. I think the methods we're using and everything I'm looking at gives me confidence. Again, depends on how you measure polls, how much you affix to their precision. My recommendation to you is don't. If I say it's a 2-point race, 1-point race, and Harris is up, don't be surprised if Trump wins. Of all the polls, sometimes you should. There's something. Hey, they're saying it's a 10-point lead, and it comes down to 2 points or something. Something's really wrong. So my best appraisal is take polls for what they are worth. They're estimates, they're samples. Even when you aggregate them, they are prone to trying to come up with right now, by the way, if you told me I know exactly what turnout would be come November, I'd be really damn confident in our estimates. I'd be like, wow, I'd go to the bank almost with them.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm estimating.
I feel like if you go back to the in-between years, the 2022s and the 2018s, the shock of the miss was definitely towards the Democrat side, except in New York State and Western Texas, where Hispanics had to come to Jesus and converted to becoming Republicans. And somehow, I guess New York State had its own redistricting issues at the last minute that kind of made non-competitive races competitive, and the Democrats, I guess, just weren't used to running against competition, it seems like, in New York. But like, it sure seems like the misses sometimes are coming out of left field. But it sounds like you're saying it really comes down to demographics. Like, if you can weight it properly, then your polling is fine. Yeah. If some community decides it's not going to bother to go to the polls this time, and it skews your weightings, then that could be the shift in the outcome.
Yeah, it is. And by the way, if you look at polling history, you can say, those 2022 and 2020 or 2020 and 2016 were underrepresenting Republicans. If anything, in 2022 and 2018, the skew was against Democrats. I mean, it's complex. If I go back, if people evaluate our polls, we've been doing it for over 20 years, and I directed the center in Wisconsin. And you say, well, over the course of their history, are they more skewed one way? Our poll has a slight Republican skew, right? We're overestimating Republican support. Yeah. Now that'll change in any cycle, right? It's part of that. But the thing that you talk about weighting. Weighting is key, and always get under the hood of polls, look how they're weighting, what they're weighting. But the likely voter thing is even more complex. Who will turn out, right? If you give me a stationary population, I don't really have to worry about turnout. I know the census parameters. I have a pretty good feel for what it is. And I have a generally good sense about turnout this fall based on a whole bunch of measures and how we screen and how we use voter files to do that. But it's imperfect. It's not precise. And so if you're using this to predict a really, really tight election, it's more variability, and it's hard. It's hard.
In your industry, can just pull the curtain back a little bit for me. Are there polls that are released to the public with the intent of shifting public perception rather than reflecting public perception, where it's like, oh no, Harris is in the lead. Like, let's keep it going, or Trump is in the lead. Is there? Because you hear these terms of internal polls versus public polls. Like, why?
Yeah, an internal poll, by the way, is put out by the party or the candidate, right? They put them out, and I want to make this clear. A lot of internal pollsters, the Trump polling team, the Harris polling team, the teams that are working for Senate campaigns are great pollsters. These are really good, talented folks that are working. They're not hacked. I wouldn't hire a hack to tell me what's going on internally. I'm running the presidential campaign. I want the real deal, right? I want to know what's happening. So they are not, going out and just cooking the book. They're trying to give their candidates information, paying a ton of money, an enormous amount, enormous samples. I'd love to have the resources they have. But ultimately, they'll release things sometimes from their polls to try to change the conversation or to give change the narrative of the story. Now, sometimes it's good data. Other times, a party will put it out, or a candidate, from some polls that are methodologically less robust, and they'll throw it out there, and I'll be asked to comment on it, and I'd say, well, I don't have enough. They haven't shown me anything how they sampled or whatever. So it's for a purpose. So be very, very concerned when you see an internal release from a poll. The other polls that Matt, get to your point, are, you'll see if you go out to Real Clear Politics or 538, you'll see sometimes a poll that has an R or a D next to it. These are not they're not with the campaign, but they're largely pollsters that poll for Republicans or Democrats and have an ideological bent in my mind. That doesn't mean they're bad pollsters, but how they might approach weighting, a whole bunch of other factors, design, it could put a little bit of bias in. So when I see those polls, I will be thinking, is the way they approached it sometimes to help a story? Yeah, they're Republicans and Democrats. Yeah. They don't want to get it wrong, but they also have other motives that might be different from a pure public pollster. You want to know what I want? I want to be right. At the end. I don't care. I just want to be right, because I'm going to get killed when I'm on.
I hear two theories, and I'd just love to hear, and then I'm done. But one theory is 2016, 2020, the pollsters missed so much that they've now overcorrected, and there's a hidden Harris wave that's about to come. And the other theory is the pollsters, idiots in 2016, idiots in 2020, idiots in 2024, and there's a red wave that's about to come. If there was a wave, like if you have a 330 plus electoral college victory, which would shock you more? That it was a miss on the Harris side or a miss on the Trump side?
No, that's a wonderful question. It probably be, because we've seen it happen a couple of times with the Trump phenomenon. And again, I put it as there were 2 years where that happened. I'd say that in my mind I have some data points that would say that's more likely, but we've seen that over history where it does flip. It flips. So would I be totally shocked on the other way around, Matt? And the answer is no, I wouldn't.
Well, I want to come in here real quick, Chris. A lot of the analysis of the polling would suggest that Trump tends to, let's say, quote unquote, underperform months out. And then as you get closer to election day, he picks up a lot of momentum. And we probably might have seen that. We saw that trend in the last two elections. There's a ton of polling data. Yours is particularly special and credited and sourced by a lot of media. Trafalgar is saying that Trump is going to win by a landslide in the measured by the Electoral College, and there was another poll out essentially confirmed that information. So what's your overall take? I know we're several weeks out. Do you want to lay your cards out on here at the table, Trump or Harris? I think we're losing sound here.
Chris, we lost your sound again.
Convenient time for the microphone to go out. Yeah. That was great.
Yeah, no, still lost it.
Well, I'm going to talk over until Chris gets back.
Actually, and I have a question, and hopefully Chris could get that sound back again, so we get that. One is the one thing, and we're almost out of time here, unfortunately. The one thing that we haven't talked about, we talked about demographics and the effects on that and some of the big issues, but we haven't really talked about the issues. Is that, and it would be interesting to know, we've got abortion basically on the ballot. We got democracy on the ballot, or freedom on the ballot, whichever way we want to talk about it. We've got immigration on the ballot. We've got inflation on the ballot. But each of those issues impacts different demographics. So it becomes this chicken or the egg. Is it more important to measure the demographics, or is it more important to the issues, or which comes first? And I don't know if you got your sound back yet. No, yeah, unfortunately not.
In a sense there, Ira, in response, it's not a national election in a sense anymore. It's sort of a micromanaged strategic approach to different constituencies. So in other words, what might be of interest to voters on the west side of New York City or to groups in Florida has of no consequence to voters in Erie County in Pennsylvania, which has a high rate of low-income voters and where fracking is an issue. So, although fracking, I guess, in the broadest sense, is a national issue because that impacts our energy policies. But there's a lot of like micro policies, and so you don't get a comprehensive national message. You don't have anybody. In other words, what I was disappointed in last night with Vance, I wanted to hear a rallying cry.
Could you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yes.
now we can. Yep.
Sorry about that. I don't know why it keeps dropping off. Something with my Mac. So I know we're almost out of time, and I'll just, John, your questions about prediction. Of course, I'm not going to predict. I'd be silly to. Polls don't predict. It's I'm trying to give a picture of where the race is. I expect it to be close. I expect it to be very, very close. Given every metric we saw the last two elections and every polling data. You mentioned the Trafalgar group. I'm not going to talk negative about other pollsters and making predictions like they're making. That's not traditionally what we do. They have a different model than we do. They had a very successful 2020 numbers. Their 2022 record was, not as successful.
Yeah.
I think I'm putting that.
What are you looking for in an election? Like, when do you know? Like, will it be Pennsylvania? Is it Michigan, Wisconsin? Like, what are you watching for?
It's wow. That's a good question. I'll be looking, Matt, for results early that can kind of give me indicators of where it matches up with benchmarks in 2020 to see changes there. Here's some of the complexities about it. With mail balloting, it becomes more challenging as results get posted, and there's an enormous partisan divide in the use of mail ballots. And there's also constraints. I'll take Pennsylvania, for example. Pennsylvania counties cannot even open mail ballots by law until the morning of the election day. They can't even take them out of their packages, which slows down the process. Which, by the way, I'll do an editorial. I don't usually editorialize. Is criminal in its nature. It's a silly, absolutely abysmal rule that has no real justification other than seeding doubt in the public about these results coming in later. Because, by the way, they skew overwhelmingly. More Democrats use it. Why? Because Republicans have cued, including former President Trump, that you shouldn't vote by mail, although he's trying to backtrack on that right now. So those results are going to come in later, and it's going to change the dynamic like it did last time. And so it makes it a little harder to appraise, right, for this. I'll be...
Do you think all the battlegrounds... Is it more likely that all the battlegrounds go one way or 4-3 split?
It's you know what, it's going to be interesting. The mail for the mail ones, it's going to be a 3-1 split, right? That we're looking at. So it should be fascinating. Sadly, I have to run to another event. I would love to chat more.
Thank you, Chris.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, guys. Great conversation.
Thanks, Chris. We'll see you down the hall.
Yeah, I'll see you, Ira. Not too far away.
That was interesting.
Wow. I would say that we were just getting into the tip of the iceberg, or we just exposed the tip of the iceberg, but that's probably an understatement. So many more questions, and hopefully maybe we can get a recap from Chris after the election. But I'm sure, as I said, before the show he'll be swamped because that's the end of the semester as well. We are at the top of the hour here, so just Matt, John, any final comments?
No, I find the political talk and conversation really interesting, and there's so many moving parts to this. We'll address this in the coming weeks with a fascinating conversation with Victor Schiff's. I'm butchering his surname, unfortunately, but he's an academic and he works on Wall Street, and he grew up and was educated in Ukraine, which in itself is really interesting. But I won't sort of spoil the plot here, but he sort of compares today's era. I was reading his book to the 1930s in terms of political volatility and our conditions and debt and all the social upheaval. And then he poses questions about where are we going, prosperity, freedom, autocracy. And I feel those questions have to be addressed. Overall, I'm disappointed with the choices we have. I'm going to vote for one, and my leanings are kind of known, but I just don't see any kind of powerful, inspiring, leader who can rally the people and can empathize. And I don't want to pull from Bill Clinton's book years ago. He says, I feel your pain, kind of a leader we need, because there is a lot of pain. Some of it's social, some of it's psychological, some of it's all the negative news out there, the sense that we're becoming third world, the wars, inflation, chaos in families, identity politics, wokeism. This is mad times.
I don't know what to say to any of that. I'm sorry. We don't need someone to feel our pain. We need someone who can go in there with a bulldozer and go through institutions that are sucking on the public fisc and wasting resources. We have a siphon, and it lives in Washington, D.C., and it siphons money out of everyday Americans, and it sends money into these institutions and bureaucracies that have no business. The most inspiring thing in the last decade was Elon Musk buying Twitter and firing 95% of the company, and the service got better. Like the idea that we have to suffer through these bureaucracies that don't work for us, that we have to suffer through these endless wars, this endless bottomless pit of money siphoning from Washington, D.C. You look around the country, and they have these statistics that show the wealthiest counties in America, the 5 wealthiest counties in America, all border Washington, D.C. And it's not because they're providing great services to America. It's not because our citizens are sitting in North Carolina right now in their dry houses driving comfortably. No, they're suffering. They don't have food. They don't have water. They don't have electricity. There's a picture on Twitter from last night that looked like the North Korea picture, where it showed the lights from a satellite of the United States lit up like a candle, and you can see the swath of America that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris has left behind because they prioritize the unions and the bureaucracy and everything that's wrong with America. It can be summed up in that one image, where you have Kamala Harris flying to DC to go to dinner to suck on beef Wellington, and in the meantime, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of her co-citizens are starving in destitution because she can't get the job done. We need a leader that will plow through that. We don't need hope and change. We need performance.
Yeah, well, in other words, we need to refund the people, defund the government, and
100%.
Yeah. And Matt, you should really consider running for office. That was eloquent. That was put in the right language. I don't disagree with you.
I enjoy my life way too much.
Defunding the challenge is, and previous leaders had it, when you defund these institutions, the transition is typically chaotic. So that has to be figured out. But we need less spending. I agree with you on that.
1 year of pain for 100 years of glory. That's what I think. Trump can do it.
Mm.
Well, I would go back 4 years, and I'm not sure in some of those challenges that the Trump response was so good either. I don't think
I totally
Puerto
agree.
Rico response.
I think when you elect someone who's not a politician and you throw him into the meat grinder, and he was surrounded that first time by people, like the Paul Ryans of the world, and who are like, oh, this is how you become president. I mean, I don't think there's a single person who paid attention that thought, including Donald Trump, that he thought he wanted to win, or 2 was going to win. And he came in unprepared. And I think the second time he has been emboldened. I'm sorry, having a bullet fly past your ear, having another sniper take you out, being indicted 4 times, like this is not making him weaker. They think they're pouring water on his flames, and what they're pouring is gasoline. He's going to come in and crush it, and America needs that, because if we're going to, or we'll just continue the current path of slow decline into historical irrelevancy.
No, I agree with what you're saying there, but we have to get away from the debt-fueled growth, So
yeah, and he's not the right person for that.
No. Otherwise, I think this guy is dynamic.
If he follows the Malay model, goes in and fires, like J.D. Vance has been out there, or not J.D., Vivek Ramaswamy. His idea is, we're going to flip a coin. We're going to fire everyone whose social security number ends in an odd or even number, depending on if it's heads or tails. And that's how we get rid of 50% of the bureaucracy on day one. Not a bad idea.
Well, fortunately, we're here for freedom of speech and lots of different opinions. So
I'm sorry for being late today.
we'll see where that goes. And that's the conversation at the intersection of Main Street and Wall Street. And it will for surely continue. We will be back at the end of the month to have another conversation. Thank everyone for taking some time to be here today. I appreciate it. If you have any comments, please go up and comment on LinkedIn or YouTube, which our replay will be available on. And until next month, don't let the shift hit your plans.
Thanks for watching Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization. Be sure to listen to the podcast and follow us on YouTube.